TTR to us. Then Philipp Koiser, who is the program leader at RNet Europe. And with this, Philipp, the floor is yours. Please introduce TTR to the participants and tell us why TTR is smart capacity management.
Thank you, Zita. My first question is, can you see my screen, Zita?
Yes.
Perfect. So thank you for this kind introduction, and thank you all for participating in today's meeting. What I will do today is I'm going to go through some aspects of TTR that many of you might know, but we're going to give it a short recap. Then we're going to focus on the implementation of TTR. As Zita mentioned, I am in charge of TTR as the TTR program leader. TTR is a quite big program with a lot of aspects to be tackled. And therefore, to keep it brief, I need to really summarize some items, but feel free to also ask more detailed questions afterwards. But let's start with the most important point why we do it. And this is a reminder, and I know that some of you may have seen this slide or similar ones already. We as sector, we need to make a modal shift a reality. And the only way that we can do this is to actually be better towards our customers. And here, I'm not talking as an infrastructure manager toward railway undertaking. Here we talk about the end customer, because our transport service is our product, and our customers are the ones who either need to be transported or have goods to be transported. And this is where we really have to be better and become better. And in our smart capacity management in TTR, we have to make it as simple as possible to get access to this capacity. We need to increase the available capacity or capacity supply based on the same infrastructure. There's billions being invested into our infrastructure, and we have to make best use of it. And of course, we should really go into a direction to better harmonize ourselves internationally. And in regards of capacity management, these 3 points is what we have to tackle, that we have to cover in order to provide with a better service to our customers, in order to actually then finally get to this modal shift. And this is our goal. It does not seem so ambitious, but looking at where we have started, you have to also realize, regrettably, that it's still a long way to go from where we have been, where we are, and where we still need to go. A very short recap, and this time I turn it around to other presentations, is what are the components of TTR? What are the small pieces that actually make TTR this new advanced capacity management? We do have always these 2 sides. We have the capacity requests, in which we have to become more active and more and better and quicker. And we do have the advanced planning. And to be honest, it didn't start with the advanced planning, although these processes are somewhere in the beginning. We started with the products. We said we have to provide market-oriented products. We need to provide better annual requests for long-term planning. We always say for requests known for long in advance. We also introduce a kind of a mix between short-term and annual requests with the rolling planning. Here, short, mid, and long-term planning is possible, also for longer periods with a multi-annual product, and also not to forget the short-term requests. In this, we have combined, in this share, we have combined ad hoc planning, but also modification, alteration of paths, but also cancellation is something that is included here. And this is where we have to become more dynamic than we have ever been before. In order that we can provide this, we have to think about how we can best plan our capacity. This means that we have to think about how the capacity can be designed on our lines. We have to shift a lot of the discussions that we have on a very short notice today to a much earlier stage. And this was the basic idea for coming up with the advanced planning of TTR. So the advanced planning is basically a result of us saying, if we want to become more dynamic, if we want to provide better products to the market, we have to think about which products to offer before we even come into a request phase. So what we do in this pre-planning, in this advanced planning phase, is that we pre-plan the known capacity requirements. This is a bit of a misconception that I've heard several times and would like to clarify. It's not about planning 100% of the capacity. It's really planning capacity wherever it is required and whatever we know that's coming up. So there's still going to be shares in all of this where we have a dynamic path request possibility with unpre-planned capacity. But what is very important, we need to include TCRs in all of this. The temporary capacity restrictions are still a major factor to identify which capacity is available by just saying which capacity is not available due to TCRs. And we're not going to remove TCRs. They're important. We need them, but we need to better coordinate them. And in order to do all of this, we have to start very early and increase the granularity of the information. We start with a capacity strategy that needs to be ready 3 years before the timetable change even comes. We do have the capacity models where we talk about we will talk about volumes until 1.5 years in advance. And finally, we have to provide a capacity supply, which should be available 11 months in advance. And this is no coincidence that it's a very similar publication deadline as we have today already with the pre-arranged paths. But what is very important is that capacity must be made available and that we guarantee an easy access to the applicants to these capacities. There is one item that was not on the list of components because it's not a process component in a way that we talk about sequence. It's an accompanying entity, the so-called international leading entities. This might be something that you have already read in old presentations. It was always there. It was an integral part of the TTR process description. These leading entities are there to monitor and stimulate and even further harmonize the processes from a European perspective. As I mentioned, these ILEs, international leading entities, are nothing new actually in the TTR process description, but we have now created together with a project that was led by the rail freight corridors, a more detailed concept where we started to think about what are the actual business needs that we have for these leading entities. So this group started to think about what needs to be done, who can do it, and how can these entities actually do it. We have taken the result now in August of this year into TTR to put it then on a wider basis. And we developed it with the goal of having a full picture on these leading entities by the middle of next year. But the goal should be that these international leading entities should have a stimulating impact on the process. So we see that there are already some entities on the table that do already exist. So Philipp, it's important.
There's a separate presentation about this.
Sorry?
There's a separate presentation about this.
Yes. Okay. Then moving on, what are the preconditions in order that we can implement TTR? It's first of all, we need to have a steady legal framework. This is what we're working on by stimulating also the legislators. We need to have harmonized commercial conditions. This is to impact or influence the stakeholders in their behavior. And even more, we need digitalization, digital capacity management. How does this look like from our perspective? First of all, it is an exchange between railway undertakings, infrastructure managers, and all other stakeholders in a frequent input-output situation. And in order to do that, we need to provide a central IT that combines everything. To connect to it, we're going to provide either apps or technical interfaces or web applications, but this should guarantee that all railway undertakings, all infrastructure managers can participate in the process. In order to do that, we need to have a common language, which is for us a standard. It's TAP TSI. And very important is that other stakeholders, not only our users and IAMs, also have to be able to get access to this dynamic process via our DCM. The implementation principles for TTR are also quite simply put. There's a central development and we do have national implementations. The central team takes care of the development of concepts and the implementation of central components and national process implementation managers and national projects take care that the process becomes also a national process, because TTR is not per se an international process, it's an internationally aligned process, which means it's no use if we only have a central IT for it or a central process and national processes do not fit. This is how we combine everything into one big program, TTR, and one big implementation. There are two basics for us. First of all, we do have the so-called backbone implementation. The backbone implementation works on the principle that everyone implements TTR with its basic requirements. And here you see all of the components, including also the digital capacity management. So when we speak about backbone implementation, we talk about the same step implementation by all the members of RNE and FTE. But there's also the possibility to speed up. We know that some of our members can already implement or already have implemented some items of TTR, and some of them even more progressive than the basic requirements. So early implementation can be done in so-called minimum viable products. And this is what you can also find in some of our members, that we actually increase the speed of the IT implementation, we increase the availability of certain items like the TCRs and the TCR tool, etc. So we know that with this, we can actually accelerate even the implementation process by providing blueprints for others. And this is being done in this minimum viable products where the rail freight corridors are also quite active. This year is a very special year for us because this is the year that we actually really start implementation of TTR. So we have for several years worked on the concepts for TTR, but this year is the first year that we have an active process actually launched, not only as a pilot, but in real life, which is the so-called capacity strategy in the advanced planning. This has started already in summer of this year, and we are at the moment focusing on the implementation for timetable 2025 with its basic requirements. That's why the capacity strategy that has started is also for timetable 25. Now coming to my last part of the presentation, and this is something very important for all of you to know. It's not that TTR is being implemented by someone else. From your perspective, TTR is implemented by all of us, which means that we have to all change our way of thinking. It's a change of paradigm for us. And with this, we need to implement, and we ask all of you also to implement a change management. Here I wrote for each IM and stakeholder. Don't only look to the infrastructure managers as the one who have to change. It also means that maybe you have to change your internal processes in order to adapt to this more dynamic and in some parts more stable planning. This requires resources and investments, and this is also why we ask also very often the involvement of senior managements in TTR, because we are aware that this requires resources, this requires funding, and this requires actually a change of mindset. So smart capacity management means that we have to become smarter than we are today, which means we have to change. So this was really TTR in a fast-paced and in a nutshell. We do have several links in which you can find further documents, further information. We do also have some contacts from the TTR steering committee and the TTR core team. So if you have any further question today, of course, you have the possibility to ask, but even afterwards, you see that our U and IMs do both have representatives in TTR. With this being said, I would like to thank you all for your attention. As I said, TTR in a nutshell very quickly, but I would give the floor now to you to ask any questions or maybe to ask for further information that was not yet presented on the slides. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Philipp. So any questions either concerning the basics, IT, or implementation? I would like to suggest to take this, I will not say one-time opportunity, but I think one of the rare occasions when you can freely ask directly the program leader of TTR and your question will be answered immediately.
Well, it seems that there are not too many questions at the moment.
But I think it shows that your presentation was absolutely informative and clear. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
And I can see that our next speaker is already here, who is Thomas Vanbeveren from Infrabel, being National TTR Implementation Manager. And yeah, as every big project, TTR, of course, also needs proof of concept. It's not the case that IAMs are rolling out TTR on RUs immediately without any testing. And I believe not many of you have heard about the latest pilot, which is the Amsterdam-Paris pilot. That's why we selected this one. So Thomas, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. So I'm Thomas Vanbeveren. I work at the moment for Infrabel as a national implementation manager for TTR, but I'm also in charge of the current TTR pilot between Amsterdam and Paris. So the goal of the presentation is double. On one hand side, to show you what on a practical level has been done the past, let's say, 3 years for TTR on the given lines, but also to show you where the rail freight corridor has helped us a bit in steering the process and in bringing people more closely together in order to get to the results which where we are today. If there are any questions, feel free to interrupt me. So just a very short little bit of history. So the TTR pilot first emerged in 2020 when we started working for timetable 2020, and that's more correct, where we started working on between ProRail and Infrabel on the lines between Rotterdam and Antwerp. And actually it was the rail freight corridor who North Sea Met who instigated the exercise and who suggested that we could start an exercise on TTR on these given lines. And it was chosen because of the complexity on the one hand side, the complexity that we have all the different types of traffic, of railway traffic possible on these lines, but also given the fact that we have a geographical scope, it was manageable. So it was not over ambitious, but it was complex enough in order to draw conclusions. And it was part from the early start on a network of different pilots who have started around the same time, with all different levels of complexity in different fields. I think that's also important to stress. In a second wave, so about 1.5 years ago, 2 years ago, SNCF Resort joined the effort, and we extended also because of questions coming on the one hand side from the IAMs and the other hand side also from the RUs present. We extended the pilot to France via the lines you can see on the screen. It's important to show you also who is still present in most meetings. So we have a let's say 3-layer organization where we have where I am the pilot lead, and there's for each IM there's a single contact person. Then we have a core team where we have meetings about 2 times or once every 2 months, where we have representatives of most of on one side IAMs in the different business fields, and on second hand side where we have the most of the railway undertakings present with an active participation. And I think that's really the most successful part of the pilot, is that we have let's say most players and present in an active way. So we can think about how we can improve things via the TTR process. And we have 2 times a year an advisory board where we invite ministries, where it's more aimed at a high level representation in order to show what we have been doing and what we intend to do. Business fields, we have about 4 action fields. We can sum up basically what we have done in the past couple of years in 4 fields. On the one hand side, freight, where we focused on the implementation of rolling planning, or at least the testing of rolling planning to a certain degree. We have passenger traffic, where we aimed especially at implementing the earlier part request deadline, also the earlier draft offer and final offer that we did for the first time this year. We have the TCRs, where we have on the one hand side, or we are trying to optimize the coordination by having a closer look at the actual processes with everyone around the table. So only that already helps, but also move forward on a harmonized variant planning in case of important TCRs, and how to deal with that, because we have many scenarios already, or we have tested many scenarios for that, but it's not always so easy, but we learn a lot from that. And a fourth one, and it's actually the 3 preceding points can also partly be linked to that. It's about capacity visualization. One of the backbones, of course, from TTR is the creation of a capacity model and a capacity supply. It's important, and one of the most important fields in TTR, so that is an international compatible capacity model. So it's not just a sum of all the national capacity models, but it's something that works, that is coordinated and it functions well together. It's important that not only from on the one hand side as a client service, that it's easy to find back the available capacity. That's important, but it's not only that, it's also about bringing discussions between IAMs to a higher level. And then we quite early in the process discovered that for that we need a tool that can show us the information in a complete way. And so we have been building, or we have been working together with RNE a lot for that. A bit more into detail on rolling planning. Given this is a group of concerning the rail freight corridors, it's a very vital point, of course. Since rolling planning is particularly aimed, or typically aimed at freight business. And of course, we have had many discussions on, okay, how can we implement this? Because one of the most important drawbacks of having a pilot is that you have to work in a hybrid situation, which means that we are testing a new set of procedures, while on other lines, the old procedures are still being used, or still have to be used. So we have always a bit a problem or we cannot completely go into the new situation as we are at the pilot, not on an island. We always have interconnections with different traffic flows coming from other networks, which are not part of the pilot, or from other lines, where there are where the complexity of allocation rules is quite different. So that we always have to take into account. So we ended up with let's say an intermediary solution. That paths, that we can give a number of paths, or we can preserve a number of paths per direction on the pilot lines for rolling planning, for freight, but we cannot, and that's something that we have very quickly discovered in our pilot, we cannot go to the desired situation that actually almost all freight is requested in a rolling planning process. If we want to intend, and if we want to implement rolling planning, and that it functions as intended at the start of TTR, then actually it's our belief that we really have to shift, let's say, freight path request from the annual timetable phase to the rolling planning phase. So that's one of the first things that we learned in the pilot. And not only that, we have said also that on top of this, it's important that there's a homogeneous way of looking at capacity. Again, we are not on an island geographically, but also we're not on an island between freight paths, between passenger paths, between high-speed paths, slow paths, etc. Also, we are not on an island and say that there are a couple of paths given to the corridor, there are a couple of paths given to another corridor, there are a couple of paths treated in annual planning, there are a couple of paths treated in rolling planning, and there's still capacity for ad hoc. You do not need or you do not need that much experience to understand that this adds complexity, or this would add complexity, which in the end does not help anyone. Especially not in optimizing the use of capacity, as is of course one of the most important factors to implement DTR. So for that we said, okay, look, we have freight capacity and we offer it in slots, in paths. We have cadences at the border. We can link it to the most important freight terminals in the area. All the traffic flows which go through the pilot lines, these can make use of this capacity, and it's governed, let's say it's managed by the COSS. So therefore we chosen to put the rolling planning capacity in the hands of the COSS. It's published via PCS, and it's the situation as it is today. But of course we believe that, and I think later on we will go to the international leading entity, but that is a very important factor, that there's an entity coordinating or having a complete view and making sure that everyone knows when there are still problems and not. And that's one of the most important factors, okay, we took out of the pilot. And again, it's a cooperation exercise between infrastructure managers, between RUs, and only that, the fact that we have that platform in order to discuss these things is very valuable and teaches us quite a lot. And if I can say, we can speak in a quite informal, very open way about these all these topics, and this is something that I've rarely seen before in other working groups. So this is a real success, or if there's one success on the pilot, it's that. The other points I will go through a bit more quickly. We have the TCRs, where it's especially about looking what can we offer as an infrastructure manager when there are TCRs, because we have the capacity supply. We focus especially on capacity supply, which is quite steady, which is well prepared and is well used by freight. But especially also by passenger. We have a 99% usage rate for passenger on the capacity supply. So, but it's especially when there are TCRs that we still need to learn, on one hand side, what can we offer as an IM, and on the other hand side, what do we need as an RU. And bringing those two together has learned us a lot, especially on what we can do on IT wise, because that's today the major drawback, the fact that IT wise on an IM level, but also RU level, it's very difficult to manage all these different alterations, variants. So we try to come up with a process for 23. We have just defined the scope where we make it very visible what is possible, what is available, and what on variant level is offered. And but the way it is treated is especially in a later phase. Capacity visualization via ECMT, but all what I have said, we try to represent in a tool which is supplied by RNE. The goal is especially that everyone has a quick availability of the capacity that is available on a given day or a given period. We are still in the starting phase. We have gained a lot of experience. It's still pushing to get it to a higher and a better level, but it's something that we really feel we need to do, and little by little we move forward, and we see there are now other countries also joining the effort and trying to push the system forward, and hopefully we can end up with a capacity hub, because that's the end product that we need to deliver, where capacity is available, we can view it and you can also order it. And that's the capacity hub in the TTR IT landscape that we are strongly supporting. The last one I go quickly because it's primarily for international passenger trains today, and that's the fact that we have shifted the deadlines, and especially the treatment period for draft and final offer, but also for observations, has shortened. We did a first test this year where it went quite fluently, and we will try to implement a higher complexity for next year, and let's see how that goes. So I think what is on here, I described most things. So we push the development of ECMT, we increase the complexity of the new part request process. We continue with rolling planning, even though the success rate is because of the hybrid situations, maybe not that high. But we want to push it and we want to keep it alive also because it's for us, this is an absolutely vital part of the future TTR process. But we will extend it also to tests with the short term, because now today rolling planning disappears 30 days before train run. We'll have a look on the short term if we can use the capacity supply as in published also for the short term if it's still available. We improve the current TCR coordination, and that's a bit of a downer here. We will have to focus on ProRail and Infrabel for the next years, because at the moment we have investigated that SNCF Réseau would enter, for example, for the new part request process, would enter the game, I would say, but unfortunately they have said that in resource wise it's at the moment not feasible. So they will still be on board as an observer and participant during the meetings, but we will not have let's say an important step forward for the next years for SNCF Réseau. And that's at the first. That's immediately also, and that's something I like to conclude with, that there's a lot of possibilities lying in the TTR process, lying in the renewed cooperation between infrastructure managers and RUs. We can enhance the role of the corridors. We can enhance the role of coordination. We can improve on the robustness and the stability of traffics, and we do it together with the RUs. But we have to keep in mind the backbone of the TTR process, and we have to make sure that we follow the same trajectory, because at the moment I see from different discussions all around Europe that there's a risk of cherry picking, that one IM or one RU wants to go into this direction, other one goes into that direction. So therefore I would really like to alert everyone on the fact that it's important that we keep open discussion channels between different infrastructure managers. And for example, via the corridors is one excellent platform for that, where RUs and IMs unite in very often, just to keep track of where the noses, in which direction the noses are in terms of TTR implementation. And it's not primarily linked to a timeline of implementation, but especially on the interpretation of some implementation methods. So that's for us on the pilot really important. And on the pilot, we can identify weak points. We can identify how we will have to implement things. But the full potential of TTR is not always quantifiable because of the hybrid situation, and we really hope that with the legal framework that might change, and with and in the next couple of years with the implementation, like Philipp said earlier, with a real implementation, no longer testing, but starting to implement things, we can move forward and we can actually show that it's of an added value for infrastructure managers and for RUs especially. So that's a bit what I had prepared for you. I don't know if there are any questions on that.
Thank you, Thomas, for this another interesting presentation. And as our next speaker is in another meeting and will not be able to join quickly, then what could be a better opportunity to ask your questions now or never, I would say. I can't see any questions, any hands raised. or comments in the chat. As we still have a lot of time, Thomas, if you want, you can still add something. Or you have
I can go on for hours if you want, but
I can see Mark Adler has a question. Mark, please.
Yeah, hi Thomas. Thank you for a nice presentation. Just maybe I missed it. Just one question: how do you see the time plan for 2026 under these circumstances you presented? Do you think everything is feasible, or do you think it's still challenging?
It's in all circumstances it would be challenging. That's a fact. There are two factors which are really important here. On the one hand side, as I showed you, there's the IT implementation, which is really vital. In order to be able to reach the full potential of TTR, we need the IT developments which go hand in hand, which support the process. We have now an excellent opportunity with the CEF call, where we can get some developments in that field subsidized. So that could really be something that supports this process. But it's in any case not a given. I mean, there's different levels of maturity on IT level in different countries, and it's important to get that harmonized. So that's really vital. On the other hand side, we also always have to take into account the legal context. The fact that, for example, rolling planning, this means guaranteeing capacity or blocking capacity at a certain level in time in order to get it across or to get it available later is in many countries not allowed. The multi-annual aspect is another problem. And the enforcing of the capacity model is a third problem, which is in most countries just not possible. And you need those three. You know, the whole TTR, the whole concept of TTR is that IAMs need to deliver stability and guaranteeing of capacity, and this helps the market. And in return, the markets, let's say the RUs, are bound to play along some rules, along some procedures, along some along some rules, or to have, and they have to respect these. And this also means that if we are unable to do quite some points, or if we have, it's just or the entire process or the full potential of the entire process is not feasible to obtain. So we have to see how the framework, the legal framework changes, will be adapted and in which point in time, and how quickly we can get the IT side of things up to speed. That's very important in order to determine at which point in time you can implement which items. That does not mean, and let that be clear, that we now have to sit back and relax and wait until we are sure what the future legal framework will look like. Not at all, but it means that we have to take that into account, and that we, for example, with the MVP approach, that was already a very good first step, where we just put, for example, we have capacity strategy, we have border harmonization, we have TCRs, where we take some items where we look, okay, what is TTR telling us about this? In which direction should this evolve? Can we do this under the current legal context? And let's push this forward. So we have done that already. And when legal context is adapted and allows us for some other things to do, well, let's implement that. But also, we have to take that into account before assessing the complete success of TTR, because again, TTR full potential needs quite some extra factors, and we cannot forget also about commercial conditions. We have had many discussions on commercial conditions. There are very different opinions in Europe between IAMs, between RUs, and between IAMs and RUs. Situation is very different one country to another, but it's a fact that today, because of a very high heterogeneity of rules, we have situations where at borders things can never match, because the set of rules is so different, and it's just a natural behavior of the market to go into that direction. So these are all things that need to be adapted. Sometimes it goes very well on some fields, like on some MVPs we book some progress in a very good way. On other fields it's always a bit slower, which is logical. So I've always said since the beginning, and I'm still saying it, look, a full big bang TTR implementation will be very difficult to obtain in any case. We have to go step by step and put pressure on all levels to move forward. And little by little, we will be able to implement things in a way that it has an added value, and it has an added value in the totality of the TTR process as well. But of course, that's my own very humble opinion.
Okay, thank you, Thomas. Mark, did it answer your question?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, then I think the next one was Georgia Mitic, please.
Yes, thank you for the interesting presentation. And the last answer, I want to ask a question about what you also just said. Do you think that a sense of a multi-speed implementation of TTR is feasible, or does it have to happen in a way that, you know, most of it implements and force the others to implement it as well? Because this multi-speed implementation might prove very dangerous, that some IMs adopt it, some others don't, due to IT, that then we have a certain patchwork within Europe that, you know, doesn't then still fit together in the end. Do you think it is feasible to have this multi-speed implementation at all?
When I think about multi-speed, it's especially linked to, or I won't say, it's on topic level more. It's true that today we already have a multi-speed in terms of different national processes. The big added value on TTR is that we bring some things that have never been discussed on international level to an international level, and we try to make it homogeneous there. We have, of course, an implementation board of TTR. We have an international TTR program where we have a close look on, and we have on a monthly basis discussions between the implementation managers of all the different countries in order to push forward and in order to assure that we are at the same speed and that we can adjust the implementation plans where needed. Of course, we will always have somewhere frontiers, and we always have somewhere where it doesn't match 100%. But we have a very good communication level, and that's I think vital and the big step forward with the preceding situation, for example.
If I may also add on this, there are two views that you have to tackle. The one is the process view, and this is very well described already by Thomas. The second one is the product view. If we introduce new products in TTR, it means that you can also start by introducing some products on a limited market in order to spread them. So it's of course a very important function of the boards and groups that we have and the implementation plan to also identify which mismatches have to be avoided. And this is, as Thomas mentioned, done by a good and close cooperation within we call it implementation board of TTR.
Okay, thank you, Thomas. Also, thank you, Philipp, for complementing this. And as far as I can see, we also have two RU representatives who have questions. So let's hear what the RUs are interested in concerning your presentation. Andrea, Marco, please.
Thank you, Zita, and thank you, Thomas, for your presentation. Questions in a time, so be patient, please. So first question, I understood in your model you built a path catalog very much early in the and you allocated part of it to the annual timetable and you reserved another part of it for the rolling planning phase. And this kind of catalog, let's call it like that, you updated it after the first draft offer of the annual timetable. So X minus 5 is roughly the draft timetable. So first question, is this to have somehow a catalog fixed very early upfront, not taking too much flexibility away from the system? Because I mean, in the past we had very often the discussion about having bandwidth or precise paths or whatever. There were different models to represent the rolling planning party. So I'd like to or have insight in how you chose this model. Second question immediately, because they are very linked to the two questions. Last update you foresee at the draft offer, I believe that this update of the rolling planning capacity should continue all during the timetabling process. So during the operation of timetable even. So the second question was this, if you foresaw also some other update moments where you might increase the rolling planning capacity due to passes made available or whatever.
Okay, thank you, Andrea, for your questions. On the path catalog, it's true that we have chosen to publish it in the form of concrete paths, and we did not use the bandwidth method for two reasons. On the one hand side, we do not have an IT solution today which enables us to guarantee capacity and a bandwidth. It would be really a bit of a gambling game for us to say, okay, we guarantee this many paths in a certain time frame, and we do not have an IT system with the logarithm behind which can generate objective data on that. On the other hand side, we also saw that given the complexity of the situation on the pilot lines, with many different interconnections, with many different traffic types, it was not manageable to work with something other than catalog paths, and we could have a really cadence situation at the border. We have regular time intervals at each hour for different traffic types. And actually, like I said, for passenger, we have almost 99% of the requests for passenger traffics on the pilot lines are requested on the slots of the capacity supply. For freight, it's about, if I'm not mistaken, last year it's about 60%. But it's also important, I think that's also something that Philipp said earlier, with a capacity supply, we do not intend to fix 100% of the capacity. We fix optimal timeframes. And on top of that, there's always wide space. There's room for ad hoc, for tailor-made in the annual timetable phase, for tailor-made in the ad hoc phase. And that gives us some extra flexibility, also in order to optimize for draft and final offer. So that's why we came to this model. And we believe it functions quite well, and we believe that it can function even better when we would have a complete TTR landscape. On your second question, we indeed, for the first year, this year for timetable 2022, we published a rolling planning catalog of a number of paths, and at draft offer, we analyzed what was the available capacity, and we increased the number of paths from 12 per direction to 16 per direction per day. We have guaranteed the 12 paths initially and the capacity supply with the notion that it could be adjusted, but only in one direction, positively. So we can only add things. We cannot take capacity, we cannot eliminate or cancel some of these paths. We described in our process charter, in our pilot information document, that we were going to do this. We were going to do the analysis at x minus 5.5. We did not intend to do this later on, even though that we leave open this possibility to increase the number of slots. And then we think especially about the short term, because we did an interesting study on the pilot where we saw that actually for rolling planning we have not so many requests, but if we look at the complete number of paths which are requested in a similar time frame, we don't see that many extra eligible requests. The majority of eligible requests, so in the time frames of the rolling planning paths that we have published, come in actually between x minus 30 and x minus, let's say, 3, 4, 5 days. So in the short term. So it's exactly one of the things we are thinking on is having an increased publication, for example, at x minus 2, at x minus 1, so 30 days before train run, where we, for example, can have a capacity view on what is still available. And then here the capacity visualization, where I made reference to, is really important, that we always have a visualization on available capacity, not only per IM, but on an international level. That is also something that would have an enormous value for the customer, for the client, but also for the IM to always know what is available on the other side of the border, because this could really lower the response times, because often, you know, in the short term, in the long term also, but in the short term, it's only more important that construction is often a ping pong game, and you lose a lot of time because of that. So that all is part of one big exercise. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you very much, Tom.
Yes, thank you, Thomas. Then we have a second question from another RU representative, Martin Ellinger, please.
Thanks a lot. Nice to talk to you after a long time, Thomas.
Same as.
I have a question to you as National Implementation Manager in Belgium, or for Infrabel, National TTR Implementation Manager. We also had a pilot here in Austria, which we tried to carry it out as successful as possible with our infrastructure manager. And we were facing the problem that the Austrian law does not yet favor a priority for freight, which would allow us to really, let's say, wait with our request until the later period of the year for the rolling planning time frame. That was the big difficulty. How to gain enough trust without being backed by a national law to wait with the request and not risk to fall to lose the priority we need to really get our path. How is the situation in Belgium here? Do you have the same issue with the RUs, and how did you manage to overcome this obstacle?
There are a couple of items here. There's, on the one hand side, we have in Belgium, it's not a black and white situation. We have basically a gray zone, which we used a bit in open communication with, on the one hand side, RUs, on the other hand side, ministry and regulator. And I think that was really important at the start, that we immediately discussed this with all actors. And I think to a very high degree, we were able to show that to the market that we could preserve capacity. We had some issues, for example, annual timetable requests, which ask capacity which was actually reserved, let's say, or guaranteed for rolling planning. We always found solutions, also in cooperation with the RUs. I think that's a really vital one, in that we, from the start, we said we are not a rail freight corridor pilot, because that would spark distrust, let's say, for passenger RUs, which is logical. I mean, we use the rail freight corridor for a lot of things, for example, for the rolling planning, but at the same time, we were moving forward on levels that could help, that could benefit basically other types of transport as well, or other modes as well. So by talking about rolling planning with passenger RUs around the table, and vice versa, by talking about earlier path request letters with freight RUs around the table, we showed really, or we had a really open communication in order to move forward, and we quickly could show that there would be solutions for everyone in the end. Of course, we were never put to the block, let's say, by an RU who really, let's say here, a passenger RU who really wanted freight capacity and did not want to change. Largely because of this open communication also up front. But we are a bit in a gray zone. For example, in Belgium, there is a possibility to reserve keep some capacity for the ad hoc. But how far does that go? I mean, if you speak to 3 different lawyers, you get 3 different opinions about that, if I can put it frankly. But that's something that we had as a backup solution. In any case, we also believe at Infrabel that in order to roll this out for a complete network, we need something much stronger to back this up. So that's a very important one. Yeah, I think that's more or less the answer I can give. I don't know if there was another element I forgot. Sorry for that.
That was it. Thanks, Thomas. If I may, how is the saturation rate on the line? Is it full or is it completely empty? Or because this also makes a big difference.
Of course. There's room, let's say, and there are many trains per hour, but it's not that it's completely saturated. There are conflicts. There are quite some different RUs, which also increases the complexity. And for example, when there's a clear situation without TCRs, we usually find solutions. But we have had also some cases, not this year, but last year, where in case of TCRs, we were looking at variants for some weekends, and where we really had some very, very tough discussions because we did not have room for everything. So there were some problem fields there. And a second point that's important to mention as well is the fact that what increases complexity is, again, we are not on an island. So the fact that there are different traffic flows going from Germany to Belgium, or from France to the Netherlands, etc., passing through these lines, of course, mean that guaranteeing capacity is not so easy, and also for clients to, let's say, to postpone their request to a later stage can only be done when it's really on the geographical scope, which is quite modest of the pilot. So we do not have an enormous number of requests that were shifted from annual to let's say to a later phase. But the primary focus is more new emergent traffics which go into rolling planning, even though that we absolutely believe, and it's not only on IM side, but we get this response also from the RUs mainly, is that actually this postponing of placing requests is a very important one. But it's clear when I say for IMs, it's important to be able to enforce to a certain level of capacity model. Vice versa, it's the same thing. We need to be able to guarantee the fact that we plan capacity for example, for rolling planning, and that we guarantee that it's available in order for our use to have the trust to change the behavior. That's something that is very, very logical. And at the moment, it's about communication and open communication and building trust on that level. But also be realistic, otherwise you lose credibility. And I think that's a very important one in the whole TTR story.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you, Thomas. Any other questions to this particular topic? If this is not the case, then now let's move from the pilots to the stepwise implementation. And our next speaker is Sophie Ismaier, who is head of the unit Path Allocation Model and International Timetable at DB Netz. So Sophie, please tell us what it means to implement an MVP with an example of the MVP capacity strategy on RFC Rhine-Danube.
Right, correct. Thank you, Zita. Hello, everyone. Happy to see some known faces out of a previous life, and I'll try and do my best to explain what we're doing. Indeed, that's a very exciting activity because it's setting a foot into the TTR implementation. The capacity strategy is the first product we're expected to deliver, end product, and so it was quite motivating for us all participating to this MVP to, start with the work eventually. So this is how we organized our work. Who is we? First, to start with, the MVP came out of various discussions, informal discussions we're running along Q1 and Q2, and are participating into this MVP ProRail, Infrabel. Thomas is our main representative here, and DB Netz, the CFL or the Luxembourg colleagues. SNCF Réseau is participating, I would say, indirectly. They receive all the results and plan to deliver their own capacity strategy following the principles we're discussing here in this MVP. Our Swiss colleagues are there, ÖBB is there, and or ÖBB Infra and RFI.
Sorry for interrupting you. Could you please put it to full screen? Otherwise, we cannot read it.
Okay. Full screen. Actually, it's a PDF, so not sure I can.
Okay.
But I can make it bigger if you.
Okay,
if you
that
want.
would be great. Thanks a lot.
Does it help this way? So it's a PDF. I'm just scrolling through.
Apps, I don't know about the others. So if anyone has still difficulties to read it, just raise your hand, and then it will be a signal to Sophie that.
Yeah, but you have to tell me and just ask, and don't hesitate to interrupt me, indeed, because I'm working with only one screen, so I don't see if someone wants to say something. So
it seems to be quite fine. As I said, if anyone has still difficulties to read it, just raise your hand, and then we will let.
Don't hesitate to be rude. Just interrupt me. That's fine, because otherwise I can't see you. All right. So yeah, we started in spring. First, organizing ourselves. First, who would like to participate? Are we in? Are we out? What does it mean in terms of resources, etc.? And we delivered for ourselves the work packages that you see listed here in the middle. And what we are now actually on time, indeed, starting to actually deliver the capacity strategy. So it's been so far quite a success story, I would say. Of course, we're just starting with the actual work, so let's see how it develops. But until now, it's been a very smooth way of working together. We have these work packages, so from work package 0 to work package 5. These structured our work until end of June 2021. And we first, of course, decided what the geographical scope would be. And maybe I can shift shortly to the map so that you get a grasp of which network we're talking about. I'm just making it, if I can make it zoom back. I'm not so familiar with this tool, doesn't really matter. But here you can see, I'll start from the north. Yep. The orange lines are those that we will include into the MVP. And of course, you have to bear in mind that the capacity strategy is to be delivered by each of us individually. So, which means that, for example, for Germany, not only these stretches will be included in the capacity strategy. We will have to develop or to deliver a capacity strategy for the complete German network. So there will be a bit more than that, but the MVP, meaning also what we coordinated among ourselves, I'll come back to the single chapters in a minute, are coordinated on this network. So for the Dutch, for the Belgian, for the German, for all others participating into this MVP, it will be the network you see here is one part of the global or of the national, capacity strategy. But what we aim at with this MVP is to test a method and to see how far we can coordinate our contents, because in the end, what we want, and that's the aim of TTR anyway, is to have an integrated picture of how we can of capacity planning, and as integrated as we can. And within this MVP, we wanted to see, or we want to test how far we can go with integrating our information to you customers. For the rest, for the actual contents of the capacity strategy, we are following the recommendations of RNE, who is also, by the way, participating into the MVP, into the meetings to guide us also, so that we're sure we're not getting apart or moving apart, and also with the aim that the RNE process group, in that case represented by Daniel Haldner in the group, in the MVP group, can also take some learnings that we found along the way to the more general, to the process group, to the general process group. So we're following the handbook, which means that in a first part, we will investigate the available capacity. So here we're not talking about the capacity after we have planned the TCRs, because this comes later. We're talking about permanent capacity increase or permanent capacity decrease. For example, if somewhere in a node, important node, I don't know, a stretch is to be taken out of service permanently, or the other way around, a third track is to be taken into operation, for example, then this would be represented, would be mentioned here in this first chapter. There under TCR's common planning principles, we all agreed that our basis is actually Annex 7, and this chapter will be very short, will be kept very short, because basically we will refer to Annex 7 plus any additional elements that might not contradict with Annex 7, but might have some national or regional specificities. For example, we could imagine that some of the networks participating into the MVP agree on a kind of code of conduct whereby all parties involved would agree that if we plan a TCR on a main line, for example, then for that same time period or period of time, TCRs on the diversionary routes should not be planned at the same time, for example. So this could come also, still needed to be discussed and elaborated, but it would come under this this chapter. And then for you customers, the most probably important information is under chapter 2.2, which is here the relevant TCRs, whereby here at this you have to bear in mind that the capacity strategy also in the target picture will come pretty much in advance and actually before Annex 7 first milestones. And here we plan to mention the really, really big ones. We mentioned that we called them once in a lifetime TCRs, and the relevant criteria very broadly said here or mentioned is first, of course, the impact on capacities. It does it, and especially capacity of international traffic, and as a result of which we also added as criteria the closeness to the border. And apart from that, each of the IM precisely because each TCR must be evaluated separately and individually. We left it to the single IMs to decide which of these TCRs should be mentioned here, because yeah, I don't know, Germany, we cannot really say if a TCR in Austria, because it is big or small or close to the network, to the border, whether it does have a big impact on international traffic. Only ÖBB can say that, for example. Then, with regards to traffic planning and traffic flows, it is also here a first indication of what is rolling upon us, generally speaking, and what flows can be expected at cross-border points. The cross-border points are those you've seen here, and we have listed them also individually. I'll show them to you right away. These are the cross-border points, which we think were mostly the main ones, and were those where the biggest part of international traffic crosses over. So here between Beuren and Infrabel, for example, then Infrabel and DB Netz, we have basically Aaron Monson here with our Luxembourg colleague, etc., etc. We have carried the exercise through for all countries and borders involved. And for each of these borders, including some major nodes, for example, for Italy, we'll consider the node of Milan, and also on the going here Tarviso Trieste will also consider the node of Trieste, because they're for international traffic particularly relevant. We will measure or give indication of the traffic flows that we're expecting at these various points. As far as the capacity strategy is concerned, we will agree in the first place on the lowest common denominator, meaning that, I don't know, for whatever reason, ProRail would expect, I don't know, 10 or rather a bit more, probably 12 trains, freight trains at the border between Emmerich-Oberhausen out of the Betuwe route going into Germany, and Germany plans only 6 freight trains on the other side of the border. Of course, we have an issue there. First, we would take note that the minimum common capacity that we can offer at the planning level of the capacity strategy would be 6, which doesn't mean that we will stay with 6, but for us, this is what we can at least agree on. This is the lowest common denominator. But in the second stage, preparing for the capacity model, DB Netz and ProRail in this example would come together and see, so how can we solve this? And how come that on the one side you have 12 and on the other side we have 6? And how can we come to maybe a more realistic market-oriented result or planning for the capacity model? So, and then, well, that would be it for the main contents. How does it look like across the timeline? Give me a second. For phase 3. So phase 3, the actual, as I mentioned in the introduction, we're now actually working on delivering this capacity strategy for 2025 to start with. And for 2026, we will start beginning of next year with actually updating the first contents for 2025, especially traffic flows and TCRs. And the idea is that we have actually, that would be the second delivery of this MVP. We would have a capacity strategy for 2026 at the end of next year. But the milestones ahead, we have the general map. I've just shown it to you. And now we are working on the detailed maps, especially for those border points and nodes where we will do think there is a need for further detailing, especially in, for example, a border point where international traffic runs on one track rather than another. Then we would detail the map so as to show which track is to which track the traffic flow estimation applies to. Same goes for the nodes. For example, in Milan or Trieste, not every track are actually relevant for this MVP. So we would say which one in particular, and we would connect or correlate this detailed map with the traffic flow or the TCR information, if there's any need for connecting them. Then we are working on common texts. We have already delivered or agreed upon some of them, and we will continue with in November with proceeding or elaborating traffic planning figures, try to see what do we have, how many, how is the gap, is there any gap in our traffic figures, and how can we solve this? As I said, the general approach is a lowest common denominator in the first place, but of course we might reconsider this if we have a better solution by then, or if we notice that the robustness of the information is not strong enough to be worked with. We'll continue in February with the available positive and negative capacity. This is the first chapter of the capacity strategy, because before that we don't think that we would have a reliable information to work on. And we would continue also with TCR planning and with a final overview of the traffic flows, which would, so in February, we would build on what we will have noticed in November. We plan with a final draft end of March, because we need to publish in July, but between the MVP and the publication, we need to harmonize with the non-MVP countries. And for this, we take around, I would say 2 months, because in the very latest part of the MVP timeline, we also have the internal endorsements and finalization of the national documents. So all in all, what we expect with this MVP is a harmonized approach, harmonized communication of information, so that our customers recognize, so to say, ideally integrated picture, but at least a harmonized picture from their start to their destination. And of course, if it should prove successful, it would be great if what we have learned out of this MVP could spread further to throughout Europe. Ideally, I guess all of us participating in the MVP would strive for the same approach and the same method, also with the non-MVP countries. So maybe in circles we can move forward. Of course, provided that what we have discussed among us is successful and brings the expected results. So that was it from my side for an introductory presentation. I'll stop sharing my screen, because otherwise I can't see your questions, but I can share it again anytime if it helps the discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Sophie, for this very comprehensive presentation. For me, it was very inspiring, and personally, I would love to hear more MVP presentations in this meeting today. Whereas we don't have time for that. We have now 13 minutes for questions and answers. So let's see if anyone has any questions to Sophie. Sophie, unfortunately,
sorry, either it was all extremely clear, or it was not clear at all. Yeah. Anyway, I can answer also after the meeting if any questions should come up afterwards.
If something comes to your mind afterwards, please post your question into chat. we will collect them and Sophie will answer then those questions after the meeting in writing.
Of course. No
Once
worries.
again, thanks a lot, Sophie.
You're welcome.
Yes, TTR being an international project, of course, it cannot work without coordination at international level. And for that, Philipp has already mentioned some keywords that someone is needed, an entity who can stimulate, who can coordinate, whether it can be an IM or an RFC or somebody else. This is something which will be answered now by Guus de Mol, who I believe is, again, the most suitable person to present it, because he can look at it both from the IM perspective and the RFC perspective, being vice president at ReNet Europe in charge of capacity management and president of the management board of RFC Rhine-Danube. So Guus, the floor is yours, and we are eager to learn who can be a legal entity.
I was not aware that I was already president of the Rhine-Danube.
Oh, sorry, Rhine-Alpine.
Nevertheless, it's okay. It's fine.
Rhine-Alpine, of course.
No problem at all. Yeah, I think listening to the previous presentation, it's interesting that in the presentation for Philipp, the international leading entity popped up. Listening to the experiences of the Amsterdam, Brussels of Antwerp pilot, we had seen that it's a lot about how do you do it, international, coordinating it. And also Sophie had a lot of discussions about how you mix at the border the number of trains on both sides, how it's be done. In the handbooks of TTR, it was clearly written, there must be an international leading entity. These are always the nice word. You need a mediator, you need a coordinator, but what do you expect? And the project has basically started within the rail freight corridor community. And in second phase, it was a coordination between the TTR project and the rail freight corridors to work out for which phases you need an international leading entity. Who can it be, but also what is the role? And to make some people quite happy now or quite disappointed, one of the major conclusions is that in the end, capacity allocation and the choice of, let's say, a TCR can only be at the IM at the moment. There is no entity internationally foreseen who can say, for example, to Belgium, you have now to construct a track because your neighbors want it. It's not working this way. It's not foreseen that it's going to work this way. So in the end, it's always the national IM, but still you need something to coordinate. What we have seen in the past, that we had in PCS, you all know it, there you have the leading entity. And in a lot of cases, one IM was the leading entity. And then in practice, they just started working, but they didn't coordinate really the neighbors of the neighbors. So maybe you need something more. So this was a starting point. This was also a starting point for the rail freight corridors. What we had seen on the other hand, sorry for taking long for the introduction. What we had also seen on the other hand, that the rail freight corridors led to a lot of irritation and, I don't want to say fights, about competences with IMs. So we really took care that what will you do? In the end, it must be clear that there's one party responsible. And if that can be a leading entity, it's fine. But if it's not, don't say that it will be responsible if in the end it cannot do it. This was a very long introduction. Especially, I don't see raised hands. So I have the same conclusion as Sophie. It's or completely nonsense for the most of you, or it was indeed very clear. and now I have a huge problem. Bingo. I couldn't find the presentation. I see.
No problem. You will have time to find it because somebody has a question.
Yeah, just
Damian. Damian?
Maybe you must.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hello from Slovenia, from Rail Cargo Carrier Slovenia. Since we all understand the issues and everything else, I think that not that there is no questions, it's just we want to hear how do you think out the solutions. But regarding what you just say, the rules in the everything, our experience with the IMs is that they have to really understand and accept the fact that train doesn't run just from border to border, that it has a starting point somewhere 2 countries away, and it has to arrive again next 2 countries. The meaning of infrastructure is not just to understand how to bring through the train through the country to border and then job done. It has to be coordinated between the IMs also. We have an experience in RFC Mediterranean that coordination between IMs on the border points is crucial for that. And I think that also in that project, you will come out with the result that if we don't have on that point the proper coordination on the level of IMs, which will take in account the interest of all the IMs, the issues of IMs, and also the interest of the clients and the RUs and so on, then the solution cannot be done. I know that everybody knows that. It's not nothing new. It's not a space technology or something science fiction, but it's I think that most important thing is that there are borders in our minds, especially in IM minds, that they have to accept the fact that they have to take care about the train. I hope that it wasn't too complicated, but that's our experience here.
No, my conclusion, it was more a statement what supports that you coordinate internationally than that it was a question. So if this is my correct interpretation.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, good, thank you. I must be also admit I had really hardly time, so I used the presentation and I will talk around. I think we had in the end 8 fields where we see that there's a role to coordinate things internationally. They're relatively clear, capacity strategy, but I come later to what you can do and who can do it. A capacity model, the planning, the publication, it's always nice that you get at the same time, the same timetable all over the route and not only in one country. The requests, the post-processing, the cancellation and modifications, and the alterations and cancellations. These are the basic fields. We concluded that there are numerous parties who you can say who can do the coordination, who can do the international leading entity. Leading entity, you can even think out of the box, but I will do the out of the box things a moment later. First, you can think about a group of IMs, and this is exactly what Sophie just described. We have a group and we discuss it in the group, and if we see there are problems, then we try to come to a common solution. That's one option. The other option is that you put it outside, and then we have only worked on outside within the IAM structure. So we didn't took into account regulators. We didn't took account in ERA. We took entities which are connected or semi-part of the IAMs. So that are rail corridors, and here is very explicitly chosen the word rail corridor and not rail freight corridor, because we see at the moment the regulation 2010-913 on the basis, on which basis the rail freight corridors do exist, and an evaluation of the 10T regulation, that there's in parallel also a discussion starting up, must we not do something with passenger corridors? And the trick in the end, it's all about capacity problems. You cannot have a freight corridor on the same stretch. Let's say Martin Erling is in the room, so you put it on the Brenner. And you also have a freight corridor on the Brenner. And then you make in both corridors higher priority rules, in the one for passenger and the one for freight. It is still the same Brenner tunnel. It's the same stretch. You have to do it once. So there's a strong voice at the moment, and there are also signals that rail freight corridors maybe become rail corridors. This is why this word is chosen. The other option is RailNet Europe, which is I even don't know the English word for it, a Verein, but it's a joint action from all the infrastructure managers in Europe. So it's not an outside body, it's a part of us. But in the past, they had also one-stop shops for corridors. So they have no knowledge in the past, and they were transferred to the rail freight corridors in a later phase. But they do have the experience with this. Then we start discussing what is the most ideal situation. The most ideal situation, if you can do it as low as possible, but you must be aware that if a conflict arises, that you take the right measures. Everybody is very sure that you absolutely need a standardization, and you need a monitoring of compliance. It's just to give a yearly report, are things going well or not going well? And then role of rail corridors could be market know-how, the contact with customers and end customers, and they also can fulfill a neutral and moderating entity. I want to go back to the example of Sophie, who said, yeah, if you don't have an agreement at the board, you must come to the lowest value and then start working from that. That can be the case. But if you talk about a capacity strategy, and even if a capacity strategy maybe on the longer term is not only for 5 years ahead, but even longer. I had a very interesting experience with a colleague of mine who worked on Eurolink. They look 10 years ahead. And he worked at ProRail, and they were discussing with the colleagues of Infrabel the number of high-speed trains between Rotterdam and Antwerp. And in the Netherlands, in all the plans for years, there was already written that there are 6 trains an hour. And in Belgium, they had the same plans already for a few years, and there were 4 trains an hour. And there were even investments foreseen on the Dutch side to increase to those 6 trains. But if they cannot run in Belgium, it doesn't make any sense. So it's extremely good if you exchange this at a certain moment. But also on the longer term, it cannot exist that in 2 countries, you have different numbers at the borders. Because then in one of the 2 countries, you get into the problems. So there must also be, and this is why I think it's very important, a neutral and moderating entity. You must start discussing with parties and think about a model, how you're going to escalate this. And this is not finally organized, but I can just give you one idea of one of the people in the team who said, maybe we must just say that this moderator must and has the right to ask the COOs or the head of timetables to have a joint meeting to make a decision what will be the number. Because if you leave it at middle level, sometimes people are just stuck in the orders they get from the head office and you never find a solution. Martin, I can do this afterwards, but just read the evaluation of 2010-913, and there you see popping up no longer rail freight corridors, but only rail corridors. So it's just in the documents of the evaluation of the Commission. These are the fields. As said, we didn't take into account ERA because ERA is at this moment not doing anything about capacity. And from the point of view as IMs, we think it's really very complicated if ERA is going to do something, because we have also to face regulators. So we get a very complicated external steering. And the same, sorry. So that was why we kept it to these three. And then, is this still readable for everybody?
Yes, it is.
It's okay. I think it's already said by Sophie, if you talk about the capacity strategy, you must talk about, let's say, the geographical scope, which borders do we do? Because sometimes you have borders with 2 trains a day, maybe you don't need the capacity strategy for that. But you must analyze the strategies on both sides. You must see the inconsistencies. And what the rail corridor can do is they can bring in, if there are problems, that they inform what our market needs, because they have the structure of railway advisory groups. They have relatively a lot of market knowledge, so they can bring this in for the international basis. The same we see for capacity planning, that you see the international coordination of works is crucial, that you can do bilateral, trilateral with experts. But on the other hand, from the rail corridor, you can support the collection of the input together with FTE. You can support creating a harmonized output. And you can make actions if there are inconsistencies or illogical things. And then it's very nice if there's an external party who can bring people on the table as a moderator and say, okay, we see this conflict. Dear 2 IMs or 3 IMs, how are you going to solve this? And so it's for all the fields we have brought together the roles, but the basis is always, it's the IMs who find out. It is, let's say, supported, verified, but also escalated and moderated by the rail corridors, and that can be temporarily the rail freight corridors, to, let's say, bring it above the table and not keep it under the table, and organize this. And RNE is always responsible for the guidelines and for monitoring the outcome. This is the idea of the international leading entity. So it's not an office who decides, it supports and it makes things clear, and it helps to come to a common solution, and it will put on the wall, if there's no common solution, that there's no common solution at that situation. That was the presentation. That was the story. Any additional questions, Zita?
Let's see whether the storyline was clear or whether there are any questions. I cannot see any hands raised. I think you have already answered Martin's question in the chat.
Okay.
So it means that today's presentations were crystal and clear. Thank you once again for contributing. And as this is the last RNE RFC session, at least for this year, I would like to thank you again to RNE for the very good cooperation in this regard. And As we have a couple of minutes left, just out of curiosity, as I can see many of you participated in more than one such session, please raise your hand if you believe that it could be valid to organize sessions of this kind in the future, maybe next year, we will see. So please raise your hand if you believe this could be a valid idea. Okay, almost everyone. It's not always real time, unfortunately, so at least half of the audience has already raised his or her hand, which already shows to me that seems to be a valid approach. We can discuss it together with the colleagues at RNE and in the RFC network. We will also have to see if and when we would have time for another session of this kind.
There must also be an interesting case to present.
Yes,
or
of
cases.
course, it has to be also meaningful. Okay, with this said, thank you once again for your participation, and I wish you a very nice afternoon. Goodbye.
Thank you all. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.